Are we overfishing? Are we cutting down too much forest? How's that affect our climate? The U.S. is the largest importer of wildlife for the wildlife trade of any country in the world. So we have some bigger challenges, but they really link to a pandemic.
The big question that comes is, whose responsibility is it to monitor and control the movement of pathogens in wildlife?
As scientists hustle to find a much-needed vaccine for COVID-19, others are taking a different track. They're studying viruses and infectious diseases by looking at our relationship with nature. Experts say about 70% of emerging diseases on Earth originate in wildlife and domesticated animals. Meat production, the pet industry, hunting, and even activities such as deforestation and development can help kick up viruses that know no borders.
Some of these influenzas that start out in the wild and become a pandemic of influenza. While we're concerned about the wildlife trade, really what's good is about this human in contact with wildlife as we encroach in wild places.
Jonathan Colby, a biologist and former U.S. Fish and Wildlife inspector, has been studying frogs for years. His research has taken him to Honduras and beyond into what he says is one of the worst pandemics of wildlife disease.
My specific area of focus has been something called amphibian chytrid fungus, which, for all intents and purposes, is the first and worst pandemic of a wildlife disease that we have ever known.
The disease has wiped out amphibians around the world, and its spread was aided by the pet and meat market for frogs. Colby studies how the wildlife trade contributes to disease and wishes people were concerned with the biodiversity of animals before it became an issue to human health.
Hundreds of species are declining from it. As many as 100 are already potentially extinct because of it. I feel like we're fortunate in a sense that the first true wildlife pandemic causing extinction internationally does not directly affect humans.
Chytrid fungus only affects amphibians, but Colby describes an international approach called One Health that considers the health of the planet as a whole, not just humans, but plant and animal life as well.
The issue of the movement of pathogens in the majority of those species largely falls into the cracks of whose responsibility is that to make sure that they're not spreading disease. The field of One Health, is becoming more acknowledged and respected, which is, the acknowledgement that the health of animals and the environment and humans is tightly interwoven, and that no one sector can fix things alone.
According to the World Resources Institute, only 15% of the world's forests remain, a major concern for sustaining biodiversity and stopping the extinction of animals, who rely on wild places to survive. Encroaching into wild places has led to new contact with animals and pathogens, leading to new viruses and diseases in humans.
What we've seen when we look at over the last 40 years, new viruses that have emerged, new diseases, and have caused huge epidemics or even pandemics, we link them with changes in land use, which means how we're working, how we're living on this planet. We are not convinced that actually the wildlife markets had anything to do with this pandemic or this outbreak. And there were some human cases that preceded the ones that got sick in the market. So we know something's been going on.
One leading theory is that the coronavirus made the jump from animals to humans in a crowded market in Wuhan, China, where shoppers buy meat and fish killed on the spot.
Where you can go to a market and pick out an animal, that's still how people shop and buy for their food, because they don't have refrigeration. Those animals are under a lot of stress, and they are just shedding their viruses and their bacteria in those settings. And you have mixing between the animals and mixing between the animals and the people. So one thing we can do really to protect the planet and protect us from future pandemics is to really help those countries come into modern times and have safer and cleaner food systems. So there's a lot of opportunities where we can exchange pathogens with animals, and the more we encroach in the natural world, the more we're exposed to those things. But now there's 8 billion of us on this planet. So we have to think about our resource use, how we're using water, what we're doing in the oceans. They're not actually independent. The things we're doing on this planet are the things that are putting us at risk to infectious diseases. So I'm hoping that as we come through this, people will come around and have a thought and say, we actually don't want this to happen again. And what do we need to do to make sure that doesn't happen?
Megan Smith, Newsy, Washington.